I got a letter from the HOA saying they were going to tow my RV. I had 48 hours. I could have argued. I could have panicked. Instead, I turned it into something no one saw coming. And when they saw what I did next, they couldn't do a thing about it. It started on a Wednesday morning. I had just come back from a month-long trip cross-country in my RV. I'd visited national parks, camped near lakes, and even spent a night in the desert under more stars than I'd seen in years. It was one of those reset your soul trips. I parked the RV in my driveway when I got home, next to the garage. I figured I'd clean out over the weekend, maybe take it to storage the following week. I was tired, hadn't even unpacked my laundry, and honestly, it just felt good to be home. You know that kind of tired? When your body's back, but your mind's still 5 states away. Anyway, the next morning, I stepped out to grab the trash bins and noticed a little white envelope tucked under my wiper blade. I thought it might be a neighbor's note, maybe someone welcoming me back. But no, it was from the Homeowners Association. The envelope had that crisp, passive-aggressive neatness you only see from bureaucracies and wedding invitations. My stomach sank before I even opened it. The notice read, "Violation community bylaws. Oversized vehicle in driveway. Must be removed within 48 hours to avoid towing at owner's expense." No hello. No. Hope you had a good trip. Just the kind of language that makes you feel like a teenager being scolded for leaving their bike out on the sidewalk. I remember standing there, barefoot, holding that letter and staring at my RV. It wasn't falling apart. It wasn't leaking oil or blocking the street. It was parked straight, clean, registered, and sitting on my driveway, on my property. It didn't seem like a crime. But apparently, in this neighborhood, it was. I moved into this HOA community about a year ago. I'd never dealt with one before. The houses were nice, lawns always trimmed, no loud parties, plenty of families and retirees. It seemed like a quiet, respectable place to settle down after bouncing between cities for years. What I didn't know was how deep the rules ran. You couldn't paint your door a non-approved color. Your trash bins had to be pulled in within a 2-hour window after collection. Christmas decorations had to be removed by January 5th, or you'd get a letter. Not a knock, not a call, a letter. That's just how things were done here. Still, the RV? That felt like a stretch. So I did what anyone would do. I called the HOA. The number went straight to voicemail, so I sent an email instead. I kept it polite. I explained I had just returned from a long trip, that the RV was temporary and I'd move it soon. I figured that'd buy me some time, or at least start a conversation. The reply came that same evening. Cold, formulaic. They reiterated the rule. No recreational vehicles or oversized vehicles may be parked in the driveway or visible from the street for longer than 24 hours. They referenced the section number of the bylaws, highlighted it, and said the 48-hour countdown had begun. If it wasn't moved, they'd arrange for towing and fine me for the costs. I stared at the email for a long time. You know when you feel like someone isn't even listening? Like they're just copy-pasting an answer to a question you didn't ask? That's how it felt. This wasn't about neighborliness. It was about power. The rule book mattered more than the people. I could have towed it to a storage lot, sure, but it wasn't just about that. That RV meant something to me. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was where I slept when I couldn't afford hotels, where I ate cereal out of the box during sunrises in Wyoming, where I wrote half of my novel in progress. It wasn't just a thing I wanted out of sight. It was part of my life. And now someone with a clipboard and a fax machine wanted to make it disappear. I talked to a couple neighbors. Some were sympathetic, but cautious. Oh yeah, the HOA's strict. They'd say, looking around like we were being watched. Others shrugged. I just follow the rules, man. Keeps things clean. One guy told me he got a warning for having too many garden gnomes. Another said his mailbox had to be replaced because it didn't match the regulation style. It hit me. This wasn't just my problem. It was a symptom of something bigger. This illusion that a neighborhood had to be uniform and sanitized to be valuable. That individuality was a threat. That the rules, once printed, could never be questioned. I considered fighting it, filing an appeal, going to a meeting. But everyone I spoke to said the same thing. Don't bother. The HOA always wins. Their favorite phrase was in violation of the CCRs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. That document, I swear, has more legal language than a mortgage agreement. They use it like scripture. And I didn't have the energy or the lawyer to go verse for verse. That night, I sat in the RV with the lights off, just thinking. I opened the windows, let the night air drift in. I made tea on the little stove and sat in the booth, looking out at the neighborhood that didn't want me, or at least didn't want this part of me. I started wondering, what if I didn't fight them? What if I found a way around them? A friend called me the next morning. He saw the post I made online, a short rant about HOA madness. Dude, he said half joking, you should just live in it full time. What are they gonna do? Tow your guest house? It made me laugh, but the seed was planted. Later that day, I pulled out the HOA documents again. I started digging, not just for rules, but for loopholes. I figured if they were going to weaponize the rules, maybe I could too. I looked for any language about use versus storage, dwellings versus vehicles. I started reading about zoning, permits, and ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Most people think of them as backyard cottages or basement suites, but technically, some counties allow portable units to qualify as temporary ADUs under the right conditions. I spent the next few hours down a rabbit hole of local ordinances and Reddit forums. I found stories of people who converted school buses into livable spaces, tiny homes on wheels, shipping container studios, and yes, even RV guest houses. It wasn't just a fantasy. People were doing this, and some of them were doing it right under their HOA's noses. That's when the idea solidified. I wasn't going to park the RV. I was going to use the RV. If the problem was that it was a store vehicle, then it wouldn't be stored anymore. It would be lived in, not permanently, but actively. It would be a guest house, and not in some shady way. Legitimately, with a permit, if necessary, with decoration, with intention. If they were going to throw the rule book at me, I'd show them I read it too. I started sketching out a plan. I'd spruce it up, make it visually appealing, add planters to the outside, hang string lights, build a small, portable front deck, not attached, of course, just adjacent, add curtains to the inside, swap out the sheets, maybe get some cozy pillows and art. I'd install a temporary electric hookup from the house, add a portable AC unit, a folding outdoor table with 2 chairs. If you looked at it, you wouldn't think vehicle. You'd think adorable little backyard retreat. That night, I sat back in the RV with a notebook and a fresh determination. I made a list: cosmetic upgrades, legal permits, how to handle plumbing and power, how to justify active use. I started researching what counted as a dwelling under the HOA's bylaws. The rules were vague in some places and oddly specific in others, but the more I read, the more it felt possible. Tricky, but possible. My 48 hours were ticking down. I knew I had to move fast, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building something, creating a solution they couldn't swat down with a form letter. I texted my friend again. You remember what you said about turning the RV into a guest house? He replied instantly. Yeah, I'm doing it. Watch. And that's where it all began. Not with a fight, but with a workaround. A workaround that nobody saw coming. Not even the HOA. The first thing I did was grab a legal pad and write at the top, "They can't tow what is a vehicle." That line became my motto for the next 48 hours. I wasn't trying to be petty. Okay, maybe a little. But mostly, I wanted to prove a point. I wasn't breaking the rules. I was just interpreting them with more imagination than they were used to. And I had the receipts to back me up. I spent the rest of that day deep in research. City ordinances, county codes, HOA bylaws. I even called a city clerk pretending I was inquiring for a future project, so I didn't sound like someone waging war against their neighbors. I found something interesting buried in the zoning site. My county had a clause that allowed for the temporary use of mobile units as auxiliary living quarters, provided they weren't used as primary residences and didn't obstruct public access. The more I dug, the clearer it became. What I had wasn't a vehicle in storage. It was a guest house waiting to be framed correctly. That night, I went to Home Depot and filled a cart with everything I thought could transform the RV from oversized eyesore to cozy retreat. I bought cedar planter boxes, solar string lights, lattice panels, 2 Adirondack chairs, and a couple of welcome mats, because one isn't enough when you're trying to send a message. I also picked up a little white signboard from the clearance aisle. It had chalk paint and came with a piece of chalk. On a whim, I wrote, "The roaming room, guests welcome." The next morning I got to work. I started by cleaning the outside of the RV until it shone. No one was going to accuse me of having a junker in the driveway. I polished the chrome, swept the roof, even detailed the tires. I planted lavender and small evergreens in the boxes and placed them along the edge of the driveway, creating a natural barrier between the RV and the sidewalk. Then I put the lattice panels behind it, secured into portable stands, and wove fake ivy through them. From the street, it now looked like an intentional design space, not just a place to park something oversized. The string lights were the finishing touch. I strung them from the lattice to the top of the RV, creating a canopy that glowed just enough to say, "This isn't a vehicle, it's a vibe." I even laid out a cheap but cute outdoor rug under the chairs and put a little side table between them with a candle on top. The aesthetic was somewhere between Airbnb tiny home and your cool aunt's garden nook. Inside, I decluttered everything and restaged the space. I added throw pillows, blankets, a little Bluetooth speaker, and a mini espresso machine I hadn't used in years. I hung art prints on removable hooks. I added a guest book. I kid you not. I even baked cookies and left them in a glass jar on the counter. It smelled like a bakery inside. The whole place radiated intention, not neglect. I was exhausted by sunset, but proud. That evening, I invited a friend over who lived a couple blocks away. I handed him a drink and said, "Welcome to the roaming room." He cracked up. "You're seriously doing this?" "Absolutely." We sat in the Adirondack chairs, sipping cold beers, watching the sun dip behind the houses. People walked by. Some slowed down, taking it all in. One woman paused and said, "Is this an Airbnb?" I smiled and said, "It's my guest house." She nodded and kept walking, clearly impressed. I filmed some short clips for TikTok. One was just a simple before and after of the RV transformation with the caption, "HOA gave me 48 hours to move my RV, so I made it immovable in the best way." I didn't think much of it, just posted it before heading to bed. I woke up the next morning to over 50,000 views. By lunchtime, it had crossed 100,000. Comments were pouring in. "This is legendary petty. I want to rent this for a weekend." HOA just got served a gourmet slice of legal loophole pie. People were tagging friends, asking for updates, demanding a tour. I filmed a full walk through the guest house and uploaded it. That one hit 200K by the end of the day. That afternoon, as I sat on the porch step sipping iced tea, I noticed a familiar black SUV slowly driving past my house. HOA board member. She didn't get out, just drove by slowly. Twice. On the second loop, she paused at the curb. I gave a small wave. She didn't wave back. The next morning, the official notice came. Another white envelope. Another citation. This one said, "Your property remains in violation of CCR Section 9.2, storage of recreational vehicles. Please remove the vehicle from visible property lines within 24 hours. I knew they were bluffing, so I wrote back, "Dear HOA President, thank you for your notice. I respectfully disagree with your assessment. The unit in question is not being stored. It is in active use as an auxiliary guest space and is not obstructing any community access. In compliance with County Code 6-43.1 and per our neighborhood guidelines, which make no explicit mention of temporary use dwelling units, I consider the matter resolved. Please let me know if you'd like to schedule a tour of the guest house." I attached the county code, a photo of the setup, and a link to my TikTok. I never heard back directly, but I know they watched it. That same week, a local news outlet DM'd me. They'd seen the video and wanted to do a short story. Creative homeowner turns HOA rule into DIY goldmine. The piece ran the following Friday. They came out with a camera crew, interviewed me on the lawn, took a shot of the RV at golden hour. I told them what I told everyone. I didn't break the rules. I read them. The story caught on. Other outlets picked it up. I started getting messages from people across the country. Some living under HOAs, others just RV lovers, tiny home fans, or people who enjoyed a good underdog story. My follower count jumped overnight. Suddenly, I was the guy who beat the HOA at their own game. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but a sympathetic neighbor filled me in. They were reviewing current guidelines for clarity and enforcement, which translated to, "We're looking for a way to stop this without getting sued." But the problem was, there wasn't one. I wasn't violating the letter of the rule. And the spirit? Well, that depends on who you ask. Was I parking an RV? Or was I curating a legal, temporary use guest unit, licensed and permitted under county allowances? I didn't advertise it. I didn't rent it out. It wasn't on Airbnb. It was just there. And I made sure it looked better than half the front yards on the block. Then something wild happened. People started coming over. Not strangers, not fans, but neighbors. A couple down the street asked if they could use it for their visiting niece. A family 2 houses over wanted to show their elderly parents who were downsizing and considering tiny home options. Someone even asked me if I'd consider building one for them. One night, I hosted a small gathering. Just 6 people. Wine, music, soft lights under the string canopy. People laughed, shared stories, told me how much they respected what I'd done. Not just a workaround, but the creativity behind it. It wasn't just about rebellion anymore. It was about reclaiming space, physically and symbolically. It was about turning something oppressive into something beautiful. I started making videos helping others do the same. Tips on working within local codes. How to convert an RV for guest use. How to check if your HOA has leeway or loopholes. I didn't encourage people to break rules. I encouraged them to read them carefully, to ask better questions, to use their imagination. The RV wasn't just a workaround anymore. It was a symbol, a quiet protest, a soft revolution. A couple weeks later, the HOA sent out a community-wide email titled Upcoming Changes to Vehicle Storage Policy. They were proposing stricter language. No dwelling units. No portable guest housing. No visible RVs regardless of use. But the catch? They needed a 75% vote to ratify the new language. And guess what? Too many people had already visited the roaming room. They liked it. They respected it. They admired what it stood for. The vote failed. Barely, but it failed. And that's when I knew I had won. Not because the HOA backed off, but because the community didn't back them. And all it took was one well-decorated, legally parked RV, one act of creative defiance, and a little string of lights. It's funny how something so small, an RV in a driveway, can turn into something so big. When I first got that letter from the HOA, I thought I had 2 options: move the RV or start a fight. I didn't plan for it to become a third option. I didn't plan to become some accidental internet folk hero for creative rule bending. I was just a guy who didn't want to be pushed around by a system that cared more about appearances than people. But in hindsight, I think that moment taught me more than any road trip ever could. Life quieted down after the HOA's failed vote to tighten the rules. I noticed a shift immediately. The constant drive-bys from board members stopped. The terse emails disappeared. I didn't get any more letters. It was like I'd passed some unspoken test. Or maybe, deep down, they realized that pushing any harder would only stir up more attention, and not the kind they wanted. Neighbors kept coming by, not just to see the RV, but to talk, to share their own frustrations. One guy told me he got written up for his flagpole being a few inches too high. Another woman shared that she stopped putting up Halloween decorations because she once got a violation for using a non-approved color for her fake spiderwebs. These weren't major crimes. These were personal expressions, gently policed out of existence. I listened to all of them. I realized something powerful during those conversations. People weren't just frustrated with rules. They were tired of feeling like they couldn't live in their own homes, like every small choice was under surveillance. The RV, in a weird way, became a mirror, a symbol. If I could get away with turning a problem into something beautiful, maybe they could too. The roaming room, as we started calling it for real, became a place where people actually wanted to be. It wasn't just a clever stunt anymore. It was useful. My sister stayed in it when she visited with her toddler and didn't want to wake the whole house at night. A friend recovering from surgery crashed there for a few days to have quiet. I even used it as my writing office for a few months. Something about being in that small, creative space got the words flowing again. I finished a novel I'd been dragging out for 2 years. People online kept asking for updates. I made a full series. Everything from legal steps to design tips to emotional stories about pushing back gently against systems that don't always serve the people in them. Those videos started getting more traction, and not just from homeowners. Lawyers reached out, tiny home builders, zoning experts, even a city planner from Oregon who wanted to interview me for a paper on community flexibility. Apparently, this little war with my HOA had sparked bigger conversations about how neighborhoods work and don't work for the people in them. Of course, not everyone was on board. One HOA board member cornered me outside the grocery store. She kept her voice low but firm. "You know, this isn't what the neighborhood is about." I smiled politely. I think it's exactly what a neighborhood should be about. People living, not just complying. She didn't respond, just shook her head and walked off. But I meant what I said. There's a difference between order and control. Rules aren't supposed to crush people. They're supposed to protect communities from harm. But somewhere along the line, HOAs like ours started interpreting anything unconventional as harmful, when really, it's a rigidness that causes harm. It drives people into silence, into resentment, into isolation. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just didn't want to hide something that mattered to me. And maybe that struck a nerve. The best part of all of this, though, wasn't the TikTok fame or the fact that I still had my RV parked proudly in the same spot it started. It was what happened after the dust settled. One of the younger couples down the block, who had previously been totally by the book, invited me over for dinner. They showed me their garage, which they had converted into a small music studio. They used to keep it hidden because they were afraid the HOA would consider it non-conforming use of property. But after the RV incident, they decided to stop hiding. They said, "You gave us the guts to just do our thing." Another neighbor, an elderly man who barely spoke to anyone before, asked if I'd help him install a small ramp for his mobility scooter. He didn't want to ask the HOA because he feared they'd say no or delay it with red tape. We built it in an afternoon. Nobody complained. In fact, people started helping each other more. Like some unspoken wall had come down. What started as one act of rebellion became permission. Permission to personalize, to breathe, to live. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. About 6 months in, the HOA tried again to update the bylaws, this time cloaked in more generic language. They didn't mention the roaming room directly, but it was clear what they were targeting. Any structure, fixed or temporary, that functions as a dwelling unit and is not permanently affixed to the primary residence shall be subject to removal if deemed non-compliant by board vote. Sneaky. But I wasn't new anymore. And I wasn't alone. This time I organized. We held a block meeting at my house. Not in the RV, my living room, to fit everyone. I printed the proposed language, highlighted the vague parts, and explained what it meant. People were fired up. Not just because of my story, but because so many of them had their own silent grievances. We voted against it. Again, the proposal failed. That was the final push. After that, the HOA backed off for good. They kept the existing rules, but they stopped enforcing them so aggressively. A new board was eventually elected, made up of more open-minded residents, people who believed in the spirit of community over the letter of control. I started writing again, more seriously. The experience with the HOA made me realize how many untold stories there are in neighborhoods like mine. Quiet battles, small wins, people finding courage in unexpected places. I began a memoir, part DIY, part social commentary. Tentative title, The Guest House That Wouldn't Move. It started as a joke, but maybe it's not such a bad title after all. The roaming room still stands. It's been 2 years now. It's changed a little. New curtains, new plants, better insulation. But its purpose is the same. A space to welcome. A reminder that just because something looks like a vehicle doesn't mean it's going anywhere. And just because a rule exists doesn't mean it's sacred. I don't hold a grudge against the HOA anymore. I understand why they thought they had to act. Sometimes systems cling to rules because they're scared of what happens when people start coloring outside the lines. But if this story proves anything, it's that sometimes the best parts of life happen in those margins. If you're watching this, maybe you've had your own version of a driveway battle. Maybe it wasn't an RV. Maybe it was your garden, or your paint color, or your Christmas lights. Whatever it was, I want you to know this. You're not alone. And you don't have to surrender your creativity just to live in peace. There's usually a way. Sometimes it takes work. Sometimes it takes guts. But often, it just takes imagination. Ask questions. Read the fine print. And when all else fails, don't go to war. Build something they never saw coming. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I was clever and kind and persistent. You don't have to yell to change things. Sometimes, all you need is an idea that fits just snug enough inside the rules to become unstoppable. So, here's my question to you. Have you ever faced a rule that didn't make sense? What did you do about it? Did you fold, fight, or find your own loophole? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you enjoyed mine, if you believe in creative resistance, community, and quiet little wins, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I've got more stories where this came from. Real ones, honest ones, the kind they can't find you for. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the best way to stand your ground is to build something right on top of it.